The one trait that separates someone that is attractive versus someone who isn't is riz, or should I say charisma, because that's what it is. Charisma involves the perfect combination of confidence, charm, and social skills, which makes people gravitate towards you. The best part about charisma is that it's a trait that can be developed, meaning you can learn it. So in this video, I'm going to tell you how to go from being that antisocial, in your bubble person to the charismatic, outgoing person that attracts the people around them. Now, if you want to be charismatic, first you need to understand what charismatic people do. Number one, they make others feel valued, comfortable, and engaged. Number two, they connect with people on an emotional level. And number three, most importantly, it's not something you force, it's someone you are. So now that we understand what being charismatic is, I'm going to tell you the 5 pillars to being charismatic, with the last one being the key to doing it all. But let's start with number one, being self-confident. This is the foundation of being charismatic, because without being self-confident, you can't project it outwards, and other people will sense that from the way you act, the way you talk, and your body language. To extrapolate this, let's look at someone who is charismatic, Matt Rife, a comedian that blew up with over 20 million followers in the past year, and people fly from all over the country just to see him. So here's him doing his thing.
What are you afraid of, man? A bad hair day? You handsome piece of shit. What's your biggest fear?
The main traits you'll notice is that he speaks loud and clear, he has very open body language, and he says things that others might consider out of pocket because he doesn't care what others think about him. But he also listens to what the audience says and engages in a banter-like manner, showcasing both self-assuredness and attentiveness, which is the next part of being charismatic. Number two, active listening. I want you to recall a time you were talking to someone and they were very self-centered, not paying attention to what you were saying, everything was about them, and that's all they were talking about. Didn't you find that unattractive, and honestly you wanted to leave the conversation? And that's because one of the biggest mistakes people do when it comes to attractiveness or being charismatic is that they think it needs to be all about them. You need to show yourself off to others, when in reality that's not the case. In the contrary, you want to be genuinely interested in what the other person is saying, then engage with that, related to something personal, ask follow-up questions. A very good way you can practice this is next time you're in a conversation with somebody and they are talking, instead of thinking to yourself, what am I going to say next, and prepping for your response while they're still talking, which a lot of us do, especially when you have social anxiety, just take the time to really listen to what the other person is saying and see if you agree with it, if you disagree with it, if you have something of value to add, if you relate to it. By doing this, you'll notice 2 things. Number one is that you'll enjoy the conversation a lot more because you're actually invested in it, which will rub off on the way you talk and the way you act. And number 2, you'll find it so much more easy and natural to respond, because instead of overlooking what they're saying because you're fixated on what you're going to reply with, you're actively listening, then adding your input to what the other person said, which makes the conversation flow a lot better and makes it easier for you. Number 3, having authenticity. When you're talking to someone, you can tell when they're putting on a facade and when they're faking their character, as opposed to when they're being genuine and authentic. And others can sense the same with you. Now, this can be hard at first because you're trying to be charismatic, but you're not charismatic, which can come off as you forcing it, which can result in you being unauthentic. But the line that sets it apart from someone who is forcing charisma versus someone who is charismatic is something that we call compassion, which studies have shown that compassion is one of the top traits for attractiveness. Now, as I mentioned, people that are charismatic connect with others on an emotional level, which creates that authenticity. So how can you do that? Well, the first step is that in any conversation, you want to understand how the other person feels by putting yourself in their shoes. And this will be shown by the way that you reply to them. So if you're charismatic, a few examples of good compassionate responses are, I get where you're coming from. I see what you mean. That's an interesting perspective. But being authentic doesn't mean you always have to kiss their shoes. It means you have to be true to yourself even when you disagree. So you could also say things like, I get that, but here's how I look at it. That's a good point, but here's why I disagree. These types of reply mixes all 3 points that I mentioned up to date. Confidence, because you're not scared of saying whether you agree or disagree with them. Active listening, because you're starting off the reply by saying, yeah, I get what you mean, I get your opinion, I hear you, and then you're adding your input. And authenticity, because you're being your true self. Number 4, this is a very important one when it comes to being charismatic. It's letting go. You see, a lot of us care so much about what other people think about us, including me, which is something I was very self-aware about and I worked on. This makes us be very restricted with our words and our banter. Things that you want to say that might be funny or informative, you might hold it back. What you need to understand is that people are more fixated on themselves than on you. The same way when you're in a conversation with someone, you're focusing more on yourself than what the other person is saying. And the crazy part is this: everyone has some sort of charisma in them. We just don't all show it. Let me ask you a question. How many times have you left a conversation and regretted not saying what you were thinking? Our thoughts are our true selves. You might have some funny, informative, valuable thought, but you're simply restricting yourself from saying them because you care what other people think about you, which makes you not charismatic. I definitely relate to this. I've left conversations before thinking to myself, damn, I should have said this. I had this funny thing to say. I had this informative thing to say. Why didn't I say this? But you're thinking it for a reason, and it's a good thought, so let go and say it, and people will probably have a good reaction to it. And if they don't, who cares? They'll forget about it. And lastly, the key to allow you to do it all, the key to allow you to practice charisma is to flirt with the world. You see, you can't just be charismatic in some settings when you want to be. Okay, I'm only gonna be charismatic when I'm talking to a girl. I'm only gonna be charismatic when I'm talking to my friend. No, because in that case, you would be forcing it. Instead, charisma needs to be someone you are. You are a charismatic person. So how do you do this? What does flirting with the world mean? Well, you're ordering a coffee, have a little chit chat with the barista. You're waiting for the bus and the girl beside you has nice hair, let her know. Just basically practicing to talk and flirt with the world. Everywhere you go, whatever you do, the thoughts that you have, just say them, interact with people, joke with people. It's the same way if you ask me, Pierre, how do I get bigger muscles? I would say, well, you train your muscles consistently. So now if you ask me, Pierre, how do I be charismatic? Well, you train yourself to be charismatic consistently. Make sure to like this video so you can come back to it whenever you need, whenever you want to be charismatic. Subscribe and turn those post notifications on so you never miss a video from me. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.